us all to get together? Yeah? How about everybody comes around this way? And while we're doing that, what's the snack for everyone who can't see it?
School board.
We're going. We should all stand.
I appreciate that.
Neil, come on. Me and you. Come on over here.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, so
Where's the camera?
all right, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Oh, you're welcome.
Seeing none, we'll move on to the matters that require board action. And the first item on the agenda is the election of school board officers. And so at this time, we'll take up the issue of board chair, and there are nominations for the position of board chair.
I'd like to nominate Rob Colbert.
For the nominations, is there a second?
Second.
I'd like to nominate Lisa Stedman.
Other nominations? Lisa and Rob, do you accept the nominations?
Yes.
No.
Other nominations? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Lisa. I am happy to turn the meeting over to you.
All right, now we'll take nominations for vice chair. Betty,
I'd like to nominate Scott Peters.
Second.
are there any other nominations? All right, we'll vote on the motion at hand. All in favor of Scott Peters for vice chair?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Are there abstentions? Scott's abstaining. Motion passes. Thank you. Per our policy, we do need to vote on SAU treasurer, secretary, and chair. Are there any nominations for chair of the SAU? Winston? Thank you. Is there a second?
Second. Absolutely.
Any other nominations? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, now treasurer of the SAU. Nominations?
I nominate Neil Moriarty.
All right, Neil? That's your answer, and that's a valid answer. So Eric said he was treasurer for 5 years. He didn't do any. Do you accept, Neil? Do you accept the nomination? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Abstentions? And moving on to secretary of the SAU. It's been Winston in the past.
Second.
Thank you. That was Kristen and Scott. Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Nick Mosier.
Fails for lack of a second. So we're voting on the motion to approve Winston as the secretary of the SAU. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Good. Motion passes. We need to evaluate our standing committees. Policy BDE states that we have 8 committees and representatives at the Cheshire Career Center and the Budget Committee. So currently we have Community Relations, Facilities, Education, Finance, Negotiations, Policy, Technology, and Extracurricular Committee. These are all listed in our policy BDE. does say the board may have the following standing committees as deemed necessary. So this year, we need to determine which committees we want to have. And the next step is to figure out who's going to serve on those committees. So we feel like this might be a good whiteboard activity for us.
Do we have markers?
Do we have markers yet?
Yeah, she was safeguarding those until the right moment, too.
Scott, you're the best whiteboarder I know, so you're in charge. We do need to lift this. Here we go.
I don't get the whiteboard. You can whiteboard.
No,
you're the best. I'll draw it on the backside for the camera.
All right, so why don't we start by listing the committees? We'll cross off the ones don't feel we need at this time. Community relations, facilities. Are you ready? How many markers are you gonna write with?
Oh, I'm figuring out which ones work.
I could have done it.
So, community relations, we nicknamed CRC.
Facilities. Education. Finance. Negotiations.
Well, we won't have any negotiations this year, right?
You can still write it down and we'll cross it off. It'll be very satisfying.
Okay.
This guy's dead.
When does the special?
Policy. Technology. Extracurricular. So we're gonna open up discussion as a board as to whether we ought to combine or eliminate any of these committees. In the past, we've had technology combined with education. We've had finance combined with facilities.
Lisa,
We don't need negotiations. Go ahead.
can that conversation include putting committees on hiatus?
Yes. So we're listening. Eric?
I'd make a recommendation to keep facilities on its own still.
What did the tech committee do this year?
It's folded into education this year.
What educations of, or which parts of technology did education discuss this year?
What was that?
Was there anything about expanding the iPad program, one-to-one devices, or anything like that? What kinds of technology did you guys talk about?
We haven't talked about a lot in technology.
I'd like to pull education back to the board.
Second.
All right. So, was that a motion or a suggestion?
I'll make a motion.
All right, so Brian's motion is to pull education back to the full board. It received a second from Nick. This year, we've been focusing a lot on education as a primary board goal. That may continue on into next year. And we've rehashed and rediscussed a lot of things that are happening in the education committee. So is there a discussion on this?
Does that include technology?
Does that include technology?
Yes, we didn't do much in technology, so I'm sure we can accomplish that here in the full board.
All right, so is the motion to bring education and technology back to the full board, or bring education to the full board and put technology on hiatus?
Bring them both back.
Betty?
Yeah, I'd bring both of them back to the board. And then if an issue arises, we can do an ad hoc
All right.
to deal with whatever issue needs to be dealt with.
And Betty, you're the present chair of the education committee, and that's your opinion. Okay. Any other discussion?
I'll offer that the policy committee has half a dozen coming in the next 1 to 3 months, which we were going to refer to education committee. One is in flight, we can bring back to the full board. But so that you know that there's things coming that are education in nature that the full board will end up sort of wordsmithing, sentence by sentence, if that's affects your decision.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, let's just see how time-consuming it is, and if it seems like it's not productive, we can always resurrect it, but.
All right, other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That was Winston, is opposed. Abstentions? Okay, and Neil's a no or an abstention?
No.
We have two no's, Neil and Winston. Motion passes. You like that job? All right, other discussion on format of committees? Lisa?
We will not have negotiations this year, so you could probably put that on hiatus for a year.
Good point. Tell me if this feels good. Does that feel good? I mean, was it worth writing it down? Winston?
The same time, all three will come on.
Okay, so we'll have a year with 3 next year. Okay.
Okay, so Winston's point is that if anything comes up in terms of contractual obligations by the board related to the unions, it's gone to negotiations committee.
If there were an issue with the agreement, it would go through the grievance process, which would come through the full board, I think.
Are you satisfied with that, Winston? Okay.
I
Nick?
just want to interrupt just for one issue, these affidavits that are coming around to sign. Can we get an update from administration before we sign it? So we have an understanding of.
They're for the safety improvements grants that we received, and in order to be reimbursed, we've completed the projects, and in order to get the money that they will reimburse us, all board members have to sign them.
And I'll explain that during the board chair reports.
I'm just going to hold off on completing the pass round.
Negotiations, education, technology. That leaves us with extracurricular, policy, finance, facilities, and community relations.
How many motions did the CRC bring to the board this year?
The CRC prepared the warrant articles in plain English, and I believe they also met with several of the select boards. Sherry was chair of the CRC. She could have spoken to that better, but I know that they were busy. They weren't dormant.
There's a communications playbook in flight. It's been under construction for a bit, back and forth with administration. And without CRC, after deliberative session, the full board would have to meet to update wordsmithing of any warrant articles that change.
Questions about any of the other committees? Feelings about combining finance and facilities as they have been in the past? Eric's already stated his position on that. All right, so we have 5 committees. We have 13 board members. We need to have, I would say, 5 on each committee is a good amount. It's an odd number, and it helps us to make sure that we're making quorum. 3 people is a fair amount to make a decision if we need them. So let's take,
So with 5 members, is the quorum 3?
the quorum is 3.
Good.
Right. Let's take volunteers for CRC first. Who wants to be on CRC?
I'll do it. I've done it before.
Should we go around and maybe just have everyone write or say what things they want to do, like do it beyond?
Sure. Betty, what committees do you want to be on?
CRC, facilities, and extracurricular. Unless that's too many.
So maybe we
You've
could,
got the time. We're
I
loving
do,
it.
and I have the interest in
maybe we
those.
could clarify that this is not the moment when you're being appointed. This is the moment when you're showing your interest, and it's the next meeting when the chairman appoints.
Yep.
I think what we did last year that worked well was we kept it on the board and on the whiteboard, and then when we took a break to go into non-public and at the end, or as people felt like they went up and they just wrote their names down,
And then we took a picture of the board afterwards and were able to work off of that.
Last year, we had a printed paper with,
Right.
with lines that
So it
got
might have been the
passed
same,
around.
maybe it was the year before we did it the other way. but-
So we are trying something a little bit different this year. If it doesn't work as well,
Different every time.
I missed that, Neil. What did you say?
I said from 1962 to 2019, you've done it different every time.
Which is exactly what I was saying. We're trying something different. If it doesn't work, we won't do it again, I promise. All right.
I was just wondering if we should write down the current, dates and times that the committees meet.
It's in the packet, I
It's in
think.
the packet.
Yeah. We can do that, and the dates and times are subject to change. Yeah. If anybody wants to pull that up and kind of yell them out for Scott to write it down, let's continue on. Colleen, do you have preference?
I think I'd like to try facilities.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Different pens.
One L, two E's?
2 L's, 2 E's.
Brian,
I will take budget committee liaison.
that's right. We should write down budget committee liaison and CRC liaison.
So I'd like to do that.
Not CRC.
No, I'm sorry, Cheshire Career Center liaison.
We know who wants that.
Winston wants that. He wants breakfast.
That's true, Winston?
Winston, do you want to be the Cheshire Career Center liaison? He would love to.
I asked Dino if he still wants to do it. No, go ahead, Win.
He's the secretary.
Excuse me, Lisa.
Brian, do you want to serve on any other committees?
I reserve the right to nominate myself again.
Okay. Rob?
Facilities?
I like serving on committees.
So what are we doing, raising our hand to get on them?
No, we're going around the room. Nick?
Oh, okay.
Colleen had her hand up.
Oh,
I
Colleen?
do have a question. Can I stay on budget as well?
No. There's only one budget committee liaison, so we can write your name down under
Interested?
interested, and you're gonna have to duke it out with Brian. All right, Nick?
I'm unsure about my schedule coming up this year, so it's not something I'm willing to commit to right now.
Okay. Karen?
Facilities, finance. I'd like to stay on wellness.
That's right, we do have a liaison to wellness, however, it's not listed in the policy.
It is there, actually, right after budget committee.
Yes, it is. Winston?
Facilities? Finance? Policy? And extra.
You're such a superstar. Thank you.
Policy and extracurricular. And possibly CRC.
Neil?
Finance and facilities.
All right. Eric?
Facilities, finance?
Boy, we're almost on the point of pulling that back to the full board.
Come on.
Yeah, we are.
I'd be okay with that.
We do a lot of work that would, I feel, take a lot of time.
Let's continue that discussion under board goals a little bit later on.
I will say, I think it is good that facilities would have 7 members, not 6, because I think this year was a little difficult having 6 members, because we required 4 for quorum. And this way, we'll have 7, we'll still only need 4 for quorum.
Okay. So finance can't really function with 3. Policy can't function with 3.
I will give up the budget and move over to finance.
All right. Thank you, Brian. All right, anyone for policy? I can make a commitment to attend policy meetings.
So is 3 quorum with 4? Is that what that means?
Yeah, 3 is. See, I don't want to throw a wrench in the gears by being the 4th person and causing 3 to be the quorum.
It has to be for meetings.
But I think our board policy says that the board chair is not a standing committee member of anything. But what I'm saying is I'll be,
Show up and vote, it says.
You're ex
I can show up
officio.
and vote. So I'll make a commitment to make as many policy
And
meetings as
also
I can.
for the quorum.
Extracurricular can probably
I don't know why I bothered to read that.
get by with 4.
So, we have a pattern of facilities and finance meeting on the same night each month, and policy and extracurricular meeting on the same night each month. I don't know how it's worked for these guys, but it's worked well for these two. So if that affects your involvement.
CRC is not going to ramp up for a while yet. We can probably recruit someone into CRC before we really have to do the heavy hitting there. 2 is not ideal. Anyone else? Yeah.
And Karen B was not here tonight, so.
Right.
And what was she serving on previously?
Facilities was actually meeting twice a month, 7 and Tuesday. Although, no facilities that, but.
Why don't we throw Karen on CRC and extracurricular if she wants to decline? Okay. What else was she on? Winston what?
You should put down the time for each of the hopefully we'll meet on the same night after one before the other.
We'll work that out.
Look at
Yeah.
that. There was a problem starting last year.
5:30 and 6:30 to call.
You can change it if you have to.
These are just current times. Karen, when were finance and facilities? What were the time?
Facilities was meeting, was it 6:30? It was after education and after finance, depending on the meeting. So it's at 6:30 both times. And then finance was at 5:30.
All right, Betty.
Do you want 5 on finance? Because I would switch from facilities to finance if you wanted.
That would be ideal.
Okay, so take me off facilities and put me on finance.
I was going to say, I really liked having an odd number on facilities, though, honestly, because this year was difficult, because if we were missing people with an even number, we needed a quorum of 4, having only 6
Then
people.
would you be willing to serve on CRC?
You have 3 on there.
You're looking at
That's a
me?
minimum of 3.
Oh, I think I'm on enough already.
The idea would be to move
To
over.
move you from facilities to CRC?
I really don't like the CRC. That's a lot of work and takes a lot of time to do that one.
All right. I think we're probably good with the slate for right now. Would anyone like to make a motion to accept the slate as it's stated?
So,
Second.
We're not,
You're saying, why do we want to do it right now?
Well, you're gonna appoint next week.
And then we approve the
But
appointment.
you have to
Well,
approve it
so
next week, next
I'd
meeting.
like to do that with support of the board.
Just with the caveat that we'll find out what Karen Bruno wants to do,
Of course, yeah.
if she doesn't.
Yeah, so I want to appoint according to the will of the board. I'm trying to kind of get your feeling for where we're at right now.
What's the second? Betty?
So the motion is to approve this slate, after having spoken with Karen as a suggestion to the board chair for appointment. Make sense? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
I guess,
Opposed?
off the wall.
Abstentions? There was one,
I abstain on this, on that.
I was just
Winston
wondering,
abstains.
committees that meet in the meantime?
No committee should meet. What do you have in mind?
I'm just asking.
So committees can meet at the scheduled times as soon as I appoint them. And I'll let everyone know that you're officially appointed after I talk with Karen. Does that sound fair? Right.
When
I
did
think
you
Janelle
actually
has input.
abstain?
Yes.
Does anybody have anything, a meeting posted between now and April 2nd?
No, but we have April 3rd for policy and extracurricular.
I was just gonna pull it up.
That should be okay.
That should work out all right.
It should be.
I think we do.
I believe they're actually posted already.
Yeah.
Well, they're on the calendar. Okay.
Yeah, they're not on the back of the agenda, but they're probably on
We
the
can make sure
calendar.
they're posted that way, you're good to go.
All right, that's,
Yeah, finance facilities meets the 26th. So I don't know. So you're gonna email us and let us know, and then at that time, the chairs would do an election again? Is that how
Yes.
this would happen?
each
Okay.
committee elects their own chair. All right, so now let's talk about the full board meetings. You have a list of proposed board meetings, Neil?
Why are we meeting at Cutler and Mount Caesar unless Mount Caesar is gonna be a tour? You can't even hear anything in Cutler.
Our policy says that we'll meet in buildings around the
Well, why don't we fix
district.
the policy?
I don't think it explicitly states that we have to meet in every building around the district, but we're the school board, and it is nice for all of us to know where the schools are, what they look like from the inside, and to get to know the principals and teachers that show up for those meetings. That's my answer.
I would move that we eliminate those and move them to here.
Is there a second to that motion? All right, Eric made a second. The motion was to eliminate visiting Mount Caesar and Cutler. Is there discussion? Kristen?
I would prefer to keep those. I like going into the school and seeing, just the artwork that's around and all of that, and I wouldn't really get a chance to besides at the school board meeting, although I haven't been to a board meeting at either of those places since they were both, had to be canceled because of snow, I think. I think I would like to keep them.
Nick?
I feel strongly on both sides. I like to visit the schools, but I would also like to have a traveling audio system with us for the schools that don't have an audio system, or that when we get to these meetings, when the audio equipment's locked up or inaccessible, it would be helpful to have those audio systems in place in advance.
Neil?
When I was the chair of the budget committee, we used to go into those buildings at 6:30, and the principal was there to give a tour. You still could do that now and come back and have the meetings here.
All right, any other input?
Yes.
Winston?
I think it's good public relation for us to be at the schools at least once a year. Some taxpayers do attend those meetings, and particularly in Roxbury, we've seen people, and Cutler, Fitzwilliam. I didn't know Roxbury. But even the selectman shows up once in a while at these meetings. And I think another thing we should do is we should make sure that the selectmen are aware they can attend the meeting when they come to their town.
Our policy states that we should meet in every town. Mount Caesar and Cutler are both located in Swansea, and we meet often in Swansea. So this motion is just on Cutler and Mount Caesar. Eric,
I was just going to say the same thing.
any other input? All right, all in favor of eliminating meetings at Cutler and Mount Caesar Elementary School?
Aye.
Aye.
I think we need a roll call for that.
Kristen,
No.
Wynn,
No.
Karen,
No.
Neil,
Yes.
Nick,
No.
Brian,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Betty,
No.
Colleen,
No.
Scott,
Yes.
Lisa.
No.
5.438 yes, 6.441 no. Did not pass.
All right. Any other input on the meeting schedule? Yes, Rob.
Can we move the start times to 6:30?
I was hoping for 6 o'clock.
I'll meet you halfway. 6 o'clock might be tight getting out of work sometimes for folks, but
Is that a motion?
I would like to make a motion to move the start times of the school board meeting to 6:30.
Second.
Discussion on that?
That's PM, right?
Yeah, it just, there are many times when we have a need to meet in a non-meeting with legal counsel or a hearing or whatever it might be, and we struggle to get here on time for those as it stands. So it's difficult to get all of us together. So I would love to make it earlier as well, but we need to leave that space for those special scenarios.
Karen?
I completely agree with Scott, and on those nights in particular, I always have to find childcare. And even having the meeting at 7, honestly, I see my husband for 10 minutes. He works a half hour from me, and I'm a half hour from Monadnock. When you're talking about me traveling all the way to Fitzwilliam, I don't see me being able to get there in time.
Kristen?
It would also be very difficult for my family. It's hard for me to get here at 7 o'clock as well. And same thing with Karen, I have to find childcare or see my husband for about a minute.
Yeah, it's like a change of the guards.
I'd like to hand over
Dinner's
the
on there, too.
gavel for a second. For my family, I do pick up my children from school at 3:10, and from 3:10 to 7 p.m. feels like an eternity. It's enough time for me to get supper ready and to say goodnight to one and tell the other kids to wind down. My preference is that if I could just get here a little bit earlier and wrap up my evening earlier, it'd be easier on my work schedule because I have to show up at work early the next morning. I take the gavel back. Thank you. Neil?
I could make any one of them, but I'll vote with the family people and say no.
All right. Any other input? Yeah, me too, and I was on the other side.
Call the question.
Be clear.
Heard someone call the question. All right, so we'll take a roll call vote on this.
I'm sorry, the motion exactly is for 6:30?
6:30 p.m.
6:30 is the yes, right?
Kristen,
No.
Winston,
No.
Karen,
No?
Neil,
No.
Nick,
Abstain.
Brian,
No.
Rob, Rob,
Yes.
Eric,
No.
Betty,
Abstain.
Colleen. No. Scott,
No.
Lisa.
Yes. All right, so motion fails. The meetings shall remain at 7 o'clock p.m. on the dates that are listed. And we have traditionally had a snow event scheduled for the following evening, the following school day, pardon me, which is typically a Wednesday. So if we miss our meeting on Tuesday, we will repost for Wednesday so we have time to meet the Right to Know Act and public meeting law. All right, is there any discussion on that? Neil?
Do we ever resolve the issue about if you canceled the school, we still can have night meetings? I know we brought it up as a policy, but we agree to it?
Yeah, the,
Pass the policy.
Can we pass?
right, the policy as it stands says that the superintendent has discretion on whether evening activities can be held.
Well, I like to see it up to the chair of the committee that's being bumped myself, but I would think if the second shift is in this building, then we, or in the SAU, then we should be able to have the meeting.
All right.
If the the custodians have been thrown out, okay, you can't have the meeting.
Second shift's always in the building.
Another country you heard from.
All right, from the Peanut Gallery. 7 o'clock PM on the dates listed with a planned snow date on the following school day. Would anyone like to make that motion?
I'll move to accept the schedule of meetings as proposed.
Second.
The second is Kristen. Yes, Nick?
Discussion, right?
Yes.
I think we've got a lot of, people are confused about this because it is confusing. There's so many different, like, I believe we have a policy that says committee chairmen set the date and time of the committee meetings, but if school is canceled, then it's up to the superintendent whether or not those can be held. And then we have, the school board meeting can be up to the superintendent, but if it's canceled, then it's the next day. So there's a lot, we have a lot of stuff that overlaps and contingencies that flow into one another, and I'll vote for this, but it seems like we're just adding another layer on top of it.
Neil?
Do you really want to meet in the Vets Hall in Richmond? The acoustics is terrible. I'll try to get it moved into the kitchen, but there's other committees in there. Well, the kitchen is big enough. The kitchen would be able to handle it. It's just that other committees meet there.
We need to meet in Richmond. Can you suggest?
Well, you used to meet down at the Y,
Yes.
Camp
and
Dakota?
you got bumped, so you had me get you the Vets Hall.
So Camp Dakota has told us that that's not a feasible option any longer.
Oh, you can't meet at the Y? Okay.
This is off topic.
Well, I'll see if I can get it. Moving in the kitchen is not bad. Most of the meetings are held in the kitchen.
I think the acoustics are better at the Veterans Hall than they were in the Great Hall at Dakota.
Well, the acoustics is terrible unless you have 100 people. That's the problem.
All right, we're voting on a motion to have meetings at 7 o'clock PM on the dates stated with snow dates the following school day. All in favor?
Sure.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Thank you. Committee year in review summaries. We'll start with policy.
Everybody get a copy in their packet? So we had talked about pulling out the projector for each committee to present, but I don't think we got that set up. So we're gonna go off of the paper you have or the electronic copy you have.
What are we looking at?
This is policy, let's see what it's called in the packet.
Policy committee review.
There you go. Thank you. So this is what we talked about at the last meeting, just wanting to share with everybody some of the history of what the committee's been doing, what we've been working on. And first slide I have for you with any substance has a little bit of history of how did we get here. So most recent memory goes back to the fall of 2016, and we received a New Hampshire School Board Association semi-annual bulletin. We get those in the fall, in the October-November timeframe, and again in the spring. There's one due out here in about a month. And also in, I forget when we made the motion to purchase this resource, but we paid New Hampshire School Board Association to conduct an audit of our policy book. And we received the results of that audit in December of 2016. And it was then almost a year later when we really buckled down and created a full-blown backlog in a Google sheet that lets us track where everything's at and why it's been brought to the policy committee's attention. And it was in February of 2018 meeting when we had our first meeting where we were showcasing how many we have of what. So if you just look at that timeline, we received some of those audit results in December of 2016, but it was over a year later when we actually got our arms around what we needed to work on. So the next chart you have looks like a bunch of beige and green columns showing you how much that has been in the backlog. So when we had that first meeting where we actually, categorized everything, we had just under 150 policies in the backlog. Today, we're down to 68 that still need attention, but there have been some points when the number of backlog goes back up because we get an audit or the bulletin comes out, and that tells us, well, we have more to work on. Why? Legislation passes, and we need to update our policies, or the School Board Association, receives comments, questions, complaints, and they update their samples, and they suggest that we, get in line with that and update our content. Okay. Sir?
When you say there's 62 in backlog, there are policies, you just haven't looked at them, right?
This is a backlog of policies that we know need attention.
Okay. You know they need work, all right.
That's right. That's right.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions on that one before I move on? Okay. So the next slide is a pie chart. So in this past year, so the first meeting would have been probably late March, early April of 2018, up through our most recent policy meeting on this past March 5th. How much did we take action on and what happened to them? So as a board, you passed 70 policy updates in the past year. I don't know if you realize how many have been coming through. There were 5 that you retired. There were 2 that you never quite heard about because we just agreed at the committee level they were simple administrative updates, like recoding something. And then there were 60 that we dispositioned, or what the committee did is we looked at what New Hampshire School Board Association said we should look at, and we said, no, that doesn't really require action. We have this policy over here. We do have that. They missed it in the audit, or it looks like, they called ABC, we call it DEF, but it's there, right? So we didn't bring every single thing we did to the full board. We don't need to, right? That's the role of the committee. So the next slide you have looks like a funnel chart. It shows, a funnel like you'd siphon something down through, and it shows you our intake process is we receive these bulletins, we get referrals from committees, different groups come in and give an audit, so we've had a couple of Department of Education audits come up recently, and that's what puts things onto the backlog, okay? Referrals come from a variety of sources. It could come from the board, it could come from a specific committee, it could come from administration, and sometimes it comes from an individual board member. And we have all of that uniquely tracked, so we know who asked and what they asked for, and when and why. And then the next slide is sort of rehashing the bulletin cycle. So October through March, there's House sessions, Senate sessions. The DOE changes their policies or their handbook. Sometimes there's federal regulation changes. And then we get a bulletin, and we go through that, and then there's another 6 months of cycles, and then we get another bulletin. And so the policy committee is, of all the committees, probably the one that's going to have the true never-ending cycle of we're always going to be doing work because the laws are going to change. So now on to the juicy stuff. What do we do with that? So now you've got a chart with some arrows on it. So first to the left, we take something out of the backlog, and as a committee we go through it, and we might refer it to administration and ask for their recommendation. Or we might refer it to another committee, like we've just referred something on advanced college placement over to the education committee, so that'll come to the full board. And we wait for that to come back. So it stays in the backlog, and we work it when it returns to us. Sometimes we do nothing and disposition it, or just do an administration update. Or we make a motion to the full board to where we either adopt or retire, or maybe you send it back to us, and it just stays on the merry-go-round until we get through it and the full board is satisfied.
Yeah.
Is the association causing part of the problem? Notice that they hold them all back and they release them in a block. Couldn't they just release them as they do them?
Well, they release the updated sample whenever they do the work.
But
they-
that isn't showing it in the chart.
Right, but they publish a bulletin to us, which is a 5 to 10 page document that says, here's everything we've been doing. And that's probably where we're paying the most attention. We're not hearing from them when they update an individual sample. They don't send out an announcement unless it's something very, very special because of a law that changed effective immediately. And so the question that really got us to this slide deck is slide 10. It's a question of how do we prioritize the work? And I think this is where, as a committee, here we're about to refresh and get into a new year of activity. This is how we've been prioritizing, and so this is, up for discussion with full board right now, but what we've been doing. A spot audit from somebody like the Department of Education, that gets our top billing. So we might even have an agenda already set for our next monthly meeting, but if a DOE audit comes through and administration says we need to respond, that's where we focus our time. After that, we're working through the semi-annual bulletins, referrals from the full board, referrals from committees, and you can see down the list. And requests from individuals goes very last. And within those, if we have to prioritize and we have, say, 10 policies in a particular vein we need to work on, we'll focus on the student policies before we focus on the staff policies, before we focus on the public policies, financial stuff, then board governance. And the atmosphere there is students first. Right? That's why we prioritize that way. Neil?
I guess the one I put in February of last year falls under number 7, but it sure seems like I should get some action on a request I brought to the board, and you people tabled it into policy. But we've got documents that only the superintendent can see.
Correct. That falls under number 7. It's a request from
Well,
you
I would think
personally.
it needs more priority than that, because we're probably violating the law, right to know law with that.
I think that if a particular policy were to be reprioritized, we could ask the full board their opinion on the importance of that policy. We could ask the policy committee to put it into bucket 1, 2, or slip it between the buckets.
No, just give me an ECD and when you're gonna do it. Oh,
Well-
excuse me, estimated complete date.
So, next couple slides, or the last 2 slides, one is a quick picture of the backlog, so you see how many are standing in each major category. So we've got 13 policies up for our next meeting, although we're starting to get into some of the more detailed work, and we're probably not going to get through all 13. We have another 43 in queue for review. We've got 6 policies that are referred out to administration or committee that they're working on. And then there's 6 up tonight for first read with the board. And then the very last slide, this is my personal opinions. We're in a high-volume cleanup mode, and I think we will be for at least a couple more years, because we have so many policies that last update shows adopted 1993, or last updated 2000 or 2001. And, we're continuing to chip away at it, but it's a lot of work, and I think we're going to be in this mode for a while. I think when we get through that, and we get through all the current referrals, then it would be time to start getting a report out of board docs where we can self-govern instead of paying for a service to go through our policy book. And we can start deciding, do we go through book K? Do we go through book J? What do we focus on? And, how far back do we look? Do we just always look at the oldest, or do we look at anything older than 2000? Or, we could probably make some of those more strategic choices once we finish this first cleanse.
Nick?
Just had one comment with the order of the prioritization. I think you can get into some obvious politics with the referrals from full board and requests from individuals. If you have somebody from the board that makes a request for a policy to review something, and the board as a whole tables it, sends it to committee, I would encourage the future policy committee to perhaps move that above at least the NHSBA policy audit recommendations, because we know that we're so far behind on those that putting requests from individuals at the bottom effectively buries it and it never gets addressed. It's just something to consider.
All right. Any other questions? I do have one. Today, I came across a policy that references SAU 38 and Hinsdale and Winchester. Have we ever done like a quick search for SAU 38, and just cleaned it up?
No? Well, we'd call it an administrative update at this point. We wouldn't be running it through the,
So those are not on the list.
they're not. I mean, we could just ask administration if they would pursue that for us.
And there's a difference between the SAU policy manual and the MRSD policy manual. To be clear, you're not touching the SAU policy manual at this time, correct?
You know, I hadn't thought about it because I think we're storing everything all together in board docs. I don't think we categorize the difference.
At this point, they're one and the same, so under statute as well, so that it really isn't a necessity to delineate them.
And that could be why the one policy I saw today slipped through. Okay.
I think that falls in the same category as, remember when we used to open the SAU meeting, close the SAU meeting, open the
Right.
board meeting, yada, yada, yada.
So if we catch those things and it's an administrative update, we could just make someone aware of the fact that policy yada yada references SAU 38 and it could just be fixed, right? Okay. Any other questions? Good, thank you, Scott. Extracurricular committee?
Scott's also on extracurricular.
Oh, is
And-
that why it looks alike?
What do we have for green templates?
Yes. So if you look at the PowerPoint presentation, we started off with the current charter, and I believe it's a good charter, but it is a little overambitious for what we did. But provide oversight and ensure that all extracurricular activities are managed. Routinely review the operations of all extracurricular groups. Serve as a bridge between the district and non-student groups such as booster clubs, local town sports teams. Routinely review the extracurricular activities in the district. Develop policy drafts specific to extracurricular activities and to forward those drafts as recommendations to the policy committee. Support the administration's continuous effort to meet the student enrichment goals of the district. There's more to our charter as well, but those are the main points. With our recent committee activities for advisory and discussion, in the beginning of the committee, we talked about funding for the scoreboards and the process, sources, branding, and policies for that, and also the Husky House management. So Tom Cody and Lisa Spencer come to our meetings, and we've had a lot of really good discussions with them. And through those discussions, we've figured out some of those items under the Husky House and the scoreboards. The stipends and stipend equity is a pretty big project. A lot of it is based on past practice and policies for establishing, or we need to know how to establish new committees and new stipends. And we've been trying to figure out the definition of curricular versus extracurricular, and that's something we've had a lot of discussion about. The roles and responsibilities is trying to identify the tasks and the governance within the schools for these extracurricular activities. And this is made a little bit difficult because of the lack of data. So we have discussions of what is needed, but we need to figure out how to gather that data. We've had a lot of really good discussion, and that leads us to the next slide.
Before you
Yes,
go
sorry.
on, I think you've discussed sports equity among the sports too, right?
Yes.
I remember hockey came up a lot.
Yeah.
It took a lot of your time, so don't discount yourself.
That's true. It's hard to condense everything into
Yeah.
one PowerPoint, but, so the intertwined challenging topics. So we start discussing stipends, and then we talk about club management, and that goes through, well, what do we have for the budget for that? And then what policies do we have for that, and then roles and responsibilities. So we kind of have this circular discussion, and we just need to figure out where to start.
What do you mean club management?
Or who runs the club, who's in charge of, say, the clubs at the high school as opposed to the sports, and, you know, we have pep band and things like that.
Thank you.
I think, so these are our challenging conversations. How many groups are there? Are they all active? Are they all active this year? Are they with or without stipends? Are they MRMHS or all schools? And who is the current leader of each? Except for the current active stipended roles, there isn't a tracking mechanism in place, so the data is really hard to come by. So we've kind of hit a wall in some of our conversations because of that. And then, once again, what is curricular versus extracurricular, and how should this shape our thinking? Basically, especially with grade policy, if a student doesn't have a certain grade, they can't participate in, say, football. But what if the student is taking or participating in football as part of a credit for a class? Is that curricular? More likely is, you know, marching band is a class, and they also have to perform at half times as part of their credit. But if they don't have the right grades, should they be allowed to perform, but as part of the class? So we kind of get that circular thinking. And what is the definition of after school if students stay in the building and continue to learn through extra or semi-curricular activities? What is the positive impact to our culture to promote more of these activities? And how do we attract more mentors and extending learning opportunities? So we've had all these conversations all year, and it's been very good. We haven't brought a lot to the full board, but I feel like we have done a lot of good work and figured out a lot of things about extracurricular. I'm excited about what we can do this upcoming year. So we really want to try to complete the stipend equity matrix, which was previously started during another committee year. And we have some good work for that started. We want to identify specific missing policies needed to govern extracurricular activities, such as the championship awards. We felt that we should probably have a policy in place for that $75 per student award that we've been giving out through the board. After school safety and attendance, stipend management, safety training, legal responsibilities for coaches and mentors, and policies such as those. And we want to try to define the roles and responsibilities to manage extracurricular activities better. And then create budget recommendations for 2020 to 2021. We've talked a little bit about possibly another role, maybe a part-time role of someone who can keep track of all these extracurriculars. If we can have attendance be looked at, all these different things. Does anybody have any questions for extracurricular committee?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry, Betty.
I just think Lisa Spencer is really looking for some guidelines from us that are something, because she's kind of in a really gray area in several situations. And so I would anticipate we will be bringing stuff to the board and moving ahead.
Nick?
This used to be called the Sports Committee at one point. I'm just curious, since we changed it to extracurricular, how much more of your discussions and efforts have involved some of the things like chess club or what non-sports activities?
Well, I can't speak to what we've done in the past, but it seems like we've actually been focusing, at least at the beginning of the year, we did talk more about sports, but now lately, for quite a few meetings, it seems like we've been talking about clubs and the bands, things like that, because a lot of those are more gray than the sports. We're trying to give some insight for Lisa and Tom to going forward. So we have been talking quite a bit.
I wanted to actually commend Eric, because he's actually the one who's gotten the ball rolling on a lot of this, if you think back 2 or 3 years ago, to how this committee was formed and how it evolved to not just sports, but sports and extracurricular. And I think part of why we were more discussing sports at the beginning of the cycle, it was before Tom Cody's role was brought to a full-time position and he had all the latitude that he has, and before that, we didn't have his role in place for a season, right?
We had part-time people.
Yeah, so now that Tom is into that role full-time, there's less sports-related content that's come to the committee as a gray area, can you please help us? And it has more of a stable standard that he's overseeing.
The other thing, there weren't a lot of policies in place when that first started in regards to sports and grades and things like that.
Any other comments on this? I want to share that we don't have reports back from facilities, education, or CRC. These 3 committees are very transparent. There's really nothing that's gone on behind the scenes with those 3 committees that the full board doesn't already know about. So we're pretty good there. Under board chair report, I want to share the voting results. They are in your packet. Really, no surprises. Everything was good. Everything passed except the dissolution of the budget committee. And with that, there was no campaigning for or against that petitioned warrant article, so that's purely the will of the voters, one by one as they went into the voting booth. So I think that's a really positive thing. So everything passed. It's good. We've got some new contracts. Neil?
Do you know why Troy was such against the budget committee?
I'm not aware, and I don't.
It's the only town that voted against it, right?
Troy certainly didn't petition that warrant article. It wasn't put together by Troy.
I'm just curious.
So I'm not certain, and I did not personally hear anyone campaigning against the budget committee in the town of Troy. I do have a list of board contact information. I'm going to pass it this way. Let's get it all the way down to Betty. This is the master. Just update your contact information. This isn't for anyone else. Let's pass it all the way down to Betty and let it come back this way.
Never get to do any.
Keep it over there.
You lost another one, Rob.
So this isn't for anyone else to look at. This is just for us to share amongst ourselves if we need to contact one another for committee purposes and mostly just for committees. I'm going to hold the teacher's insurance pool update until later in the meeting. I don't feel comfortable speaking to that. I think that we do have more information coming later on. Kind of.
Well, there's, the update is that, I mean, it's pretty short. It's that the MDA did file an appeal with the Supreme Court, and so that will likely take a year and a half to come to some resolution.
Easy enough. I was going to let the lawyer tell you that, but now you know.
He's running late, so I'm not sure when he's going to get here.
All right. There is a new school board member orientation that's taking place May 9th in Concord at the New Hampshire School Boards Association. Colleen, if you want to go up, you can ride with me. We can go together because they typically do a chair orientation at the same time.
I appreciate that, but I'll actually be in Fitchburg leaving work to go.
Right.
So,
But we'll make sure that you get information that you need to get sort of ramped up with the board.
Thank you.
There's also a school safety and security training on April 9th that's coming right up. I would love for someone to attend that. I can go if no one else would like to, but we do have several folks, maybe from the facilities committee, that would be interested in that, because a lot of what's going on with safety and security is facilities related these days. So please have a look at whether you're available on Tuesday, April 9th, which is not a school board meeting evening, and let me know if you can attend. Your attendance is free and your mileage will be reimbursed.
I think
Sure.
facilities meets that night. I'll just call the meeting.
Everybody go.
I'd like to go to as many meetings as I can, so I can kind of wrap my head around everything.
All right. So would you like us to sign you up for that one?
Yeah.
All right, I'll make sure that we get all of the information we need to get you signed up. All right. Our board goals review. We focused on safety and security this year, and so I have some documents I want to send each way. For you paper lovers, I'm sorry. I used some extra paper, sort of against the will of our superintendent. I need one of those.
Trees are crying, people. The trees are crying.
The reason I did this is because we've done such hard work on school safety by looking at the task force recommendations this year that I think we're nearly ready to retire that as a focus and a goal. We have gone through all of the recommendations, almost all of the recommendations from the task force from the Governor's Commission. There were 59 recommendations. We have 2 topics that we still need to cover. Those topics will be covered on 416 and 57, training and exercises. And once we cover those 2, we will have hit all of the areas that the Governor's Commission feels like we should have addressed as a school. A lot of them were not applicable to us. Many of them we were able to say, okay, we've already done that. And a lot of them we said these were quick hits, easy, let's get it done. And we just got it done. So I'm really proud of us. And then a couple others is like, oh, well, that's a good idea and we should start to focus on that. And we have safety committees that started meeting early in the year. If you look at the last page of this document, you'll see where we started with school safety committees, September 14th. Those committees are still meeting. They're still looking through recommendations. They're still coming up with ideas. And one of the greatest things that's happening now is that we're continuing to get grants from the state to implement some of the safety features. So you'll see that Troy has recently received a grant. We need your signatures. Every school board member needs to sign that. Nick, I see you're still holding it hostage there.
Karen and I both have. I'd like to hear about it before I sign my name.
So everyone needs to sign that, and I'm going to let Janelle speak to it.
So there are 2 reports there. One is for Cutler, one is for Gilsum School. The Cutler grant was for security cameras only. The Gilsum grant was for security cameras and window film. Both of those school projects have been completed. And so I just compiled the report as to what we actually expended. The state is reimbursing us 80% of that. We have to submit that by April 1st or submit for an extension. I did submit for an extension for the high school, Mount Caesar, and Emerson School because they had to stop on the window film project due to the cold temperatures in the fall. Those are supposed to be completed over April break, those 3 projects, and the Troy is still on the wait list for the...
I misspoke, I'm sorry.
Yeah, for the funding, but we're pretty confident that we will get that funding for Troy.
Thank you.
All right.
I expect that there'll be turnback funds from many districts that will be reallocated. There's a letter in your packet indicating that that project is in the proposed budget for the biennium, but it'll be funded out of existing funds, I'm pretty sure, because there will be turnbacks from other districts.
Rob?
So I have 2 questions, Lisa, because you are our safety person. How many active shooter drills have we conducted this year?
We haven't done any active shooter drills. We have done lockdown drills in all of our schools, which would be the school-based response if there was some type of need to, if there was an intruder in the building, that would be our initial. We had scheduled an active shooter training in October in this building with local law enforcement agencies, and that got postponed and then it got canceled by our partners in law enforcement for scheduling reasons. So hopefully we'll be able to reschedule that. Typically those are held over vacations or on the weekends.
But there is no recommendation from the state or from federal authorities to actually practice an active shooter drill.
With students,
At least
again,
one of which should test emergency response to an armed assailant, recommendation 3.
And that's lockdown.
Okay, and then the second, my comment in relation to what you said in terms of retire this, I think that would be a huge mistake. I mean, maybe not as a total focus, but I think just as technology is always evolving,
Right.
I think safety and security is always going to evolve. So I'd be careful using the word retire or put this on the back burner.
So what I meant was it may not be one of our 3 focus goals.
Right, it might not be a
for this
primary
board
goal,
year.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Also, we've had a heavy focus on SRO versus SSO this year. So, as was the commitment, we've had school safety and security on every single agenda for this school board year, and I think we've done a really good job of getting through a ton of content there. Betty?
Are we doing anything on the secure vestibules? Because some schools are pretty good, and then others, it's not as much, and I don't know what's.
The Troy, correct me if I'm wrong, Janelle, the Troy project that is waitlisted is a vestibule. We're looking at if there is an additional round of safety and security funding grants similar to this, that would likely be something we would look at for other buildings, either to upgrade current vestibules, for example, at Mount Caesar, ensure that the second set of doors is locking as well. If through those grant funds, if not, then we would look to do it in some other fashion. But we have looked at that, and that is what the Troy project would entail if we get those funds.
Rob, I want to jump
about
back to yours
Emerson?
for a second. I do want to point out that recommendation
Yeah,
number
we've talked
30.
about it, but we didn't put it in for a grant flow because
Okay.
we'd already received a grant for Emerson.
Okay.
Recommendation 35 is going to be on the agenda for 5-7, and that one is regarding exercising active shooter drills. So we will talk about that again in the near future. Hope that's satisfactory. Any other questions about the school safety focus? For student growth as a focus, we have we've implemented that through ed reports that appear on every agenda throughout this year. And I think that Jeremy has done an excellent job of bringing to us some very interesting topics on student growth and education. I do hope that that'll remain as a part of the agenda. And as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, just about everything that's going on in the Education Committee has been brought to the full board. I think that we've done a really robust job of dealing with that board focus area this year too. And then for the third was capital improvement. Capital improvement is happening quite a lot behind the scenes. Our Finance and Facilities Committee, our Facilities Committee does have something that they want to address with us this evening so we can kind of get up to speed on where we stand with capital improvement. It would be my recommendation that we continue to focus on this in the next board year as well. I believe that from Karen, we have an RFP for a consultant.
Yeah, we don't really need board approval, but we did, as a committee, go through the request for proposal for the consultant. Janelle worked really hard with us, and she pulled up some other school districts. So as she said, no sense in reinventing the wheel. And we went by just last night, line by line, and we made all the changes. And so we're ready to move forward with that. So I just wanted to give the board an update.
So, yeah, Nick.
Just for everybody out at home, could you just give a 60-second on what this person will be doing?
Yeah, so basically for this past year, facilities has looked over, we did the Turner reports with all of the information on where our schools are and the amount of work that they need. Some of the school buildings need a lot more work than others. And a motion earlier in the year had been made to look at combining Cutler, Mount Caesar. So the committee spent a good portion of the year looking at all of the options and ideas and brainstorming, speaking with our attorney, and basically we have decided that this is a big enough project where it makes sense to get a consultant to come in because we're talking about facilities, but we're also talking about each town and the emotions behind that. So having an outside person come in, we felt would be beneficial to lay things out in terms of what savings would be, and then we could also take those ideas back and over, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. My suggestion would be for our next 3 goals, and this is up to discussion for sure. We're going to talk about it at the next meeting. I think we should continue on with student growth and capital improvement plan. And for our 3rd goal, it would be a good idea for us to focus on legislative advocacy and school funding at the state level. Those would be my suggestions, and please be thinking about suggestions that you might have for the 3 board focus goals for the next meeting. We'll talk about them then. Operations and superintendent's report?
Jim, you're here hiding, but I can see you. Would you like to join us at the table and join our discussion about school security officers, and then also, if we can rearrange the agenda a little bit and talk about the Conval piece right after that. Wherever you would like.
Sit there now. Hi. Get the man a microphone. Board
How's my
members,
makeup look?
if you want to grab some of that lovely trail mix that was made for us, feel free.
Okay, so the board, I've talked with Jim, we had a couple conversations about the topic at hand, which is having a school security officer as an armed personnel on school property. So this person is not a school resource officer who by definition is a badged police officer. And so I know we had sought a written opinion from Jim about kind of what that would need to look like. Talked about that at the board level, and I think Jeremy and I tried to do a little bit of back and forth to interpret, and I think it was a couple meetings ago, I suggested that perhaps we should have Jim come and be able to answer questions directly, because I didn't feel like I was representing what was in his opinion very clearly. So Jim is here, to answer questions if you have them, or to speak to the topic.
Right. Nick?
Just before Jim gets started, it sounded like you're kind of surprised that you're going to be presenting in public. Is that okay?
It's really up to you. So I'm providing, I presume, legal advice, and you're a public body, but you're entitled to go into non-public and to recess and have a conversation with me if I'm providing legal advice as a non-meeting. That's up to you. You can waive those rights and decide to proceed in public. If there's a point where I feel as though providing you the information may not be in your best interest, or if I'm disclosing something that would prejudice you, I might suggest that we have a conversation in private, but it's your decision, members of the board.
Is there anyone who feels it's appropriate for us to go into non-public at this time?
Doesn't matter to me.
I think we're comfortable with the content.
Okay. So would you like me to start, or do you have specific questions, or how do you want to proceed?
Should we have armed SSO in the school?
Oh,
It's going to be a totally different question.
If we were to pursue that, what would be the policy issues we would need to consider, and how would we go about considering them? Because
Okay.
there aren't currently existing policies. Also, there's some legislation that could have an impact on our ability to do that as well, so.
Yeah, this is historically a topic that's come up every couple of years, since I think there was a petition warrant article, I don't know the year, 2011-12, to no longer permit you to have an SRO or something along those lines. At a certain point in time, historically, I think it became political, and so you discontinued having a formal SRO, which is a law enforcement officer in your school, and instead you've had a security guard who's an employee, and I made a recommendation several years ago that's an uninsured liability and an uninsured risk for the district, and that it was my recommendation that person not be permitted to carry a firearm unless certain measures were put into place. So I wrote a pretty comprehensive legal opinion. Just so you folks are aware, you're certainly out at the very front of this issue statewide. So you're forging new territory, and anytime you're forging new territory, it's difficult to identify all the risks and potential unanticipated things you might be encountering. I want to be clear that, because you asked me to tell you, my first recommendation, in my opinion, which you guys are certainly free to do whatever you'd like with it, is that you have an SRO and not a private security guard. And the reason I make that recommendation is, first of all, it's also supported by the governor's report that came out last year. But more importantly is a law enforcement officer is coming to a school with law enforcement training already in place, with standards for how often they have to go through certain training and marksmanship training, whereas you hire a security guard, and that security guard may or may not have law enforcement training. They may not be up to date on certain things. What I said, my opinion is there are, I can help you identify legal issues, things that you'd want to make sure you covered prior to arming a security guard. It's legal, in my opinion, to authorize an employee of the district under certain circumstances to carry a firearm. I don't think you're going to be told it's illegal. If you decide to implement this protocol, my recommendation is that you work with a law enforcement consultant from an organization like MRI, which is Municipal Resources Incorporated. They have former police chiefs and law enforcement people who work for that organization who could provide you specific advice as to policies, procedures that you might need to have in place. But the issues I sort of identified as areas that you would want to think about, and let me just sort of, this is not a comprehensive list, but so when you're thinking about someone being in a school with a firearm, just on a practical level, right, what do you think about? Has the person received what we refer to as school-based law enforcement training? And that actually is a thing. So there is SRO training that is provided by a national organization. I'm not sure that every SRO who's a law enforcement SRO in New Hampshire receives that training, but school-based law enforcement is something that exists, and it's the kind of training I would think you would want a security guard to have prior to working in a school. What about use of force in a school setting? It's a complicated place to be armed with a firearm. I think about, has a person been trained on how to evaluate and respond to a threat in a school versus a threat out in the general public, where there's a threat in the general public, police officers have standard operating procedures and they've been trained. There may not be that same level of training on how to deal with a threat in a school setting. It's not the same kind of a situation. How to safely engage in a gunfight in a school. You're in an enclosed area, there's lots of kids around. Issues that are really practical, like who owns the firearm, what kind of ammunition, where is it kept on the person, how is it secured on the person, is it concealed, do you want students to see it? Those are all things that I think the board needs to kind of define and establish and think about. The specific issues that were also identified in the governor's report are issues such as balancing self-defense for students, third-party self-defense versus adhering to the prescribed school lockdown protocol. You have a lockdown protocol, you referred to that, so during a lockdown, announcements made, everybody retreats to their classrooms, blinds are whatever the protocol is that's been established by Homeland Security in New Hampshire. What is the interplay between a employee who's a security guard, not an officer of the law, but a security guard, and compliance with that protocol? There has to be some thought and discussion about like what that person's role is in that situation. One of the things we talk about is understanding special ed students, understanding social emotional immaturity and development, the adolescent mind, how adolescents behave, bullying in schools, also understanding Title IX, harassment and discrimination laws, federally and statewide. And the reason you have to understand those is you have middle school students who may look to that person for guidance, and they may be involved in situations involving those. So I certainly would recommend that kind of training. So I put together kind of a checklist of issues that I would want the board to consider and the superintendent to consider. It's in my document. So I certainly think the starting place would be, regardless of whether it's an SRO or an SSO, is collaboration with the local police, establish a communication protocol, define an emergency. When would that person use force versus having the police come and use, what is that, how does that break down? Develop standard operating procedures for responding to threats in a school. So law enforcement has SOPs, you guys don't have SOPs because you're a school district. You're gonna have to get something in place, whether they're local regulations or a policy, that identifies some of those operating procedures. Who owns the firearm? What kind of, there's all kinds of questions, and I just don't know what the answers are, but I'm sure you could work with law enforcement to identify answers. Where does it go at the end of the day? Does the person take it home with them? I certainly would recommend some mandatory form of training. There's several different trainings that go on, and I'm sure the state might be able to help replicate some of those trainings. I'm almost done. There's a firearm proficiency course that law enforcement are required to, I don't know how often, but they're required to go through the proficiency course somewhat regularly. I would certainly expect that anybody carrying a firearm in a school would go through and meet those minimum standards. I have a bunch of mandatory school law training that I think they should be aware of. And then I just have some general liability questions that are complicated to answer, such as, does immunity apply? We know that certain immunities apply to law enforcement when they're engaging in deadly force, right? And this is a huge issue nationally. It implicates a lot of different things. How does that overlay with a non-law enforcement school security officer? Those probably don't apply, those immunities, but other immunities may apply. I'm not sure our law is comprehensive enough to kind of address those issues. Does Primex have any concerns? What level of coverage is provided? What considerations need to be made with respect to your coverage with Primex? Preventing students from getting a hold of guns. Who's responsible if they do? Those are just sort of general big picture liability issues. What if a student or staff member is hurt? God forbid. What other policies and procedures need to be in place for other employees, students, parents to protect the district? So it's complicated, and complicated things mean you gotta break them apart, divvy up the work, figure out how you're gonna do it. I am by no means saying it's not doable. I'm just saying it's not easy. I would not recommend you just, say, all right, Dave or John or Mary, you're free to have your gun. That would be a bad idea. I think that would not be my recommendation. So I basically conclude that I'm happy to help you move forward. I can work with the superintendent. I can help interface with the folks at MRI or help find the appropriate consultant. Whatever support I can give along the way, if you decide to move forward with trying to arm an SSO. Years ago, I have a document from September of 2013, when board member, myself, some folks from LGC, which doesn't exist any longer, they had some law enforcement people. We developed an action plan for what we would want to do before we implemented this. And this is certainly, I can share this. This is something that can be updated, modified to move forward. And that's really all I have. I'm happy to answer questions, but you're embarking on kind of a novel course right now.
What questions do we have? Nick?
Are there any cases in New Hampshire that you know of, or any school districts which have adopted this model with having an SSO
No.
that is armed? Okay, thank you.
Nobody has one yet?
Nope. Because of Monadnock's in 2000, because you guys were looking at this, I became fairly proficient in this area of school and law enforcement and guns, and this is not a conversation that's happening in other districts as far as I know.
Most other districts have SROs.
Yeah.
I was just gonna clarify that.
All right, other questions?
Well, if nobody else has one.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you didn't cover the fact that we have 6 different towns, that we can't really have a security officer from Swansea, say, because he can't operate in Troy, or at least it'd be very difficult for him to operate in Troy. So I guess if nobody's done it, nobody's looked at having the sheriff do it, like Richmond just did. We solved ours by getting somebody, sheriff, he can go anywhere he wants. State police can go anywhere they want, but not local cops.
Eric?
I was gonna say, I think we did talk to the sheriff, and he wasn't willing to do it.
Did we have him come in? We didn't want to come in?
We talked to him, was no interest in the sheriff's department at the time.
When was that?
Way back when Dick was
Oh,
still
okay.
here.
Brian?
I'm good.
I want to clarify that it's an SRO, an employee of the police department that can't travel to other towns, an SSO could.
We don't know that.
I think we do.
Which part? Don't.
That an SSO can travel among the towns and an SRO could not, because they wouldn't have jurisdiction.
I'm not sure. I didn't look into how other cooperative districts handle the SRO issue, because primarily it would be a Swansea police officer housed here for the middle and high schools. I mean, Lisa can back me up on this, but for the most part, you don't see a lot of SRO activity at elementary schools. But I could see a situation where you want someone to head over. I'm not sure that if you had an incident in Troy or an incident somewhere else, Gilsum or something, local police can just, get there just as quickly as the SRO here would be able to get up to Gilsum.
But there's no question as to whether an SSO could travel
Sure.
among the towns.
Yeah, I agree.
Neil?
What grade do you think that 11-year-old that just shot 2 people is? He's probably in 6th grade. It's just a matter of time.
Rob?
I just want to remind the board how enthusiastic's the wrong word, but how supportive the chief of Swansea was of this idea. And did talk about how he would take personal responsibility in terms of spending the summer getting the appropriate person trained, so working with the administration to provide the appropriate training. So we've already got the local police chief on board, and not only were we, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong because you were here, but I thought he articulated that it was not only time, it was past time to do this, to move forward with this, and that, so he was fully supportive, and I don't remember the whole conversation, so I don't want to misquote him.
Scott?
Yeah, so I'm just following on with Rob, that I think we got to that point of seeing the enthusiasm of the Swansea police chief, and I think we reached out to Jim asking, okay, so what is the punch list of things we would need to do? Like, expecting you need to do these 9 things, whatever they might be. And what we're hearing you say is that it's a little more murky than that because we're in uncharted territory, and perhaps we should consider some third-party consultant from a specialist in this area. But I think we got here because a few months ago we were asking for, show us the activities so we can determine if we can march through them in time for that summer training and getting ready for the next school year and that sort of thing. Maybe we can't move that fast because we need that consulting and we need to think, but I do think we're looking for an itemized list of activities so we can say, go, no go, this is what we want.
Well, we're discussing it, right? That's why he's here.
I do feel like if we're going to continue this discussion, we need to have a motion either to begin to investigate the checklist or engage MRI or something. We need to know what we're going to do next.
I would make a motion to ask the superintendent to push forward with doing due diligence behind what would need to be done to arm an SSO. Not necessarily saying yes or no, but to really engage that, what was it, the third-party consultant,
MRI?
and to re-engage the police chief in a much deeper discussion. And report back at an appropriate time.
First, let's see if we have a second.
You know, it's the first meeting of this group, and we're trying to bypass the finance committee. If we're gonna spend money on this consultant, and I guess Jim knows a couple of them, then let's send it to finance, find out how much we're gonna spend, and put a request for quote out.
Is there a second to the motion?
A second.
All right, now, other discussion? Scott?
Jim, do you have a sense or an opinion on how much of a consulting engagement we're talking about here? Is this an afternoon of somebody's time, or are we talking about an extensive?
I'm kind of speculating. I don't think it's months of work. It's just you need some kind of rule in place or job responsibility list and protocols in place, a punch list for the do's and don'ts. And I think many of those may be able to be borrowed from your local police, and then sort of translated into a school setting. But I don't think myself or other attorneys who just sort of practice law are the experts in that area. You need someone who really has done that kind of work and has worked on standard operating procedures in a police force to help you guys put that list together. I don't think it's that extensive, though.
If we were to go out to bid for this sort of consulting, would we find more than one bidder, or is MRI it?
I wouldn't bother going out to bid. Just call the consultant and get it done quickly. I don't think there is anybody else out there. Personally, I don't.
MRI is the same company we used for interim business administrator services a year ago.
Nick?
I personally would like to learn more about it. It makes me a little nervous that we're kind of at the tip of the spear on this, and it makes me even more concerned that Jim has brought forward some issues that, a lot of this stuff isn't even covered in law. So if there was an issue to arise, we don't even know how
I think that's what we're doing. I
we
think we're
would
on the same
proceed.
page.
Well, I think what Jim was getting at with some of the questions about the use of force and immunity and how that would apply to somebody that's not a law enforcement officer. That was one concerning point that you made. And how we would proceed if there was an issue. Perhaps this consultant would be able to answer some of those questions, but it sounds like coming from a lawyer who's an expert in that area, I'm assuming that expertise in that area concerning the law, we kind of have an answer right there. And to me, that's a significant hurdle that it's going to be difficult for us to overcome. But provided it's not a substantial amount of money to get this consultant in and discuss these questions, I'd be happy to learn more.
Neil?
I'm gonna make a friendly amendment, Rob, to also contact the sheriff and see if he's changed his mind.
I'm okay with that. It's kind of a deviation away from an
Well, it certainly would
SSO.
solve a lot of problems.
But if you're okay with that being on
I
the
don't
same
even know who the
motion.
sheriff was many years ago.
Don't feel like it's related enough, but you're the motion maker, so.
I am the motion maker. And
He is the motion maker.
Didn't do the whiteboard, but.
I would take that amendment.
All right, so to clarify the motion, it's to instruct the superintendent to investigate engaging with MRI as a consultant, what it would take to complete the checklist, and to
Re-engage the police
re-engage
chief.
the sheriff's department. Is that understood? Kristen?
Can I just make one more comment?
Yeah.
This is a very long opinion that I wrote. It's about 7 pages long, and it covers a lot of different topics. I use a lot of words, and it's very wordy. I don't want to leave today without being really clear with you folks, and I'm just going to read one statement here, because I think you need to understand what I'm saying. It is my strong recommendation that the district work directly with local law enforcement to provide a school resource officer on school grounds as that is a well-established program that addresses the vast majority of safety and liability concerns that arise with an armed SSO. You are free to move forward. I'll support you, but I want you to understand that I'm not recommending it. I'm recommending an SRO.
Karen?
I'd prefer to, I'm assuming we're going to get that written letter that we could actually read, but, and table this motion, and maybe bring it up next meeting after we've reviewed everything that our attorney brought forward and put together.
Sounded like a motion to table?
Yes,
Is
motion
there a
to table.
second?
I will second that.
What's the new motion?
I made a
Table.
motion to table.
Table it?
So we can
To
read
who?
his letter.
All right.
Oh, so we read his
Is there
letter?
discussion on the motion to table? All in favor of tabling?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Do a roll call, please.
Yes. Let's do roll call.
Kristen?
So to table, yes.
Wynn?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Neil?
Abstain.
Nick?
Yes.
Brian?
No.
Rob?
No.
Eric?
Yes.
Betty?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Scott?
No.
Lisa?
Yes.
7.562 yes, 3.241 no. Passes.
All right. This will be on the next meeting's agenda.
Can
Yes.
I just ask a question? I'm not sure if it fits or not, but as the law stands right now, can't anyone technically bring a firearm onto the school grounds? So if a staff member, I don't know, brought a firearm onto school grounds, is it just policy that we have?
Staff and students, there's policy, but general public in New Hampshire, if they are properly permitted, which now they don't need to be properly permitted, they can conceal carry, open carry on school property. We can ask them to leave school property if we don't want that. And we do
Our
have
policy
the
says
School
that, yeah.
Boards Association's worded policy that says, we have a policy that says we will ask you to leave. Local law enforcement can't arrest them for having possession of the weapon on school property because it's allowed by state law. We can certainly call them and ask them to help us encourage the person to leave, and then pursue, any other legal action such as trespass. But in terms of the actual bringing of the weapon on school property, they can.
So let me just respond. This is an issue that came up last year. I was asked the same question at the Lebanon School Board meeting, and
Right.
it sort of from there has taken off. So the law is really in flux. So the Gun-Free School Zones Act under federal law has a number of exceptions. Arguably, anybody who has a legitimate concealed carry permit in New Hampshire meets one of those exceptions. Many people aren't getting concealed carry permits because they're no longer required. So that creates this interesting situation because you're also not allowed to ask somebody to show their concealed carry permit unless you're a member of law enforcement. So school administrators really don't have a mechanism to try to sort of enforce that federal law. The New Hampshire Attorney General's office has taken the position that they will not enforce, and local law enforcement is not to enforce that law. In addition, RSA 15926, I think I gave her my, is a law that basically says no municipal subdivision or state subdivision shall regulate the possession, use, sale of firearms other than the state itself. And there are a number of people at the legislature who have taken the position that that provision of the law says even school districts can't regulate the possession of firearms on their own property. Right now, I know there are a number of different bills circulating with respect to firearms, but there's one specifically, do you know the number? It's 464. I can't keep track of all of them, but there's there's a House bill right now that is proposing an amendment to the Safe School Zones law to prohibit possession of firearm on school property, basically. And it seems to be making its way through the process, but that's still in process, so that there's really nothing to report on that right now.
I will say that when I went to the delegate assembly, the New Hampshire School Boards Association was instructed by the delegates there not to take a position on that particular piece of legislation.
Thank you.
We'll ask you to hang around because we do have another topic. We're going to skip over early retirement for a moment. And we need you for this.
So I had emailed all of you the press release that Conval School District had issued announcing that they had filed a complaint and a motion for judgment regarding school funding inadequacy. So a while back, you'll recall, I testified for a couple of bills, one House bill and one Senate bill, that sought to raise adequacy funds from the 3,600 currently to just under 10,000. And neither of those, or sorry, it was just a House bill. That bill won't make it through in its current iteration, but that bill, that was the work of the Conval district. They did all of the work. They gathered all of the data to look at statewide averages for the most part and say, well, what does an adequate education really cost? Taking the conversation out of the, whether we want adequate or exceptional out of the equation, just what's adequate. And they estimated that on average, at least about 10,000 a student would be adequate. And so they filed the lawsuit, and I shared that information with you. And there's been some interest. I've seen interest kind of going across our social media channels about whether that is something that the Monadnock Regional School District is interested in joining. And so since Jim was coming tonight, I figured it would be an opportune time to have that conversation, whether or not, again, you want to do that in public session because you'd be considering legal advice. So that is your decision to make if you want to have this conversation in public or not. But he is here and can answer questions relative to that.
Does any member of the board feel it's appropriate to go into non-public at this time?
I move to go to a non-meeting, recess and non-meeting.
Under,
All right. Nick?
This should be in public.
Do we have a second?
I think that Winston was the second.
I know he's asking under which.
I'll second.
It's a non-meeting. We don't need
Oh,
it.
yeah, we don't even have
what's it on me?
Nick?
So discussion on this?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I did.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So simply because we don't know what this is going to involve, I think that's why we need to have a non-public session on this.
Karen?
Just procedurally, can we recess and have a non-meeting during the middle of our meeting?
We've done it before.
We can, okay.
Brian?
For me, I think if we're just asking questions, I have no problem doing this in public.
Any other discussion?
And I think if we're going to receive advice from legal counsel, that's a reason to be in non-meeting.
The conversation with me is likely going to be about the possibility of entering the litigation and what our strategy may or may not, if you decide to do that, may or may not be, the pros and cons, the merits of the case, that I certainly wouldn't want to prejudice our case or give the defendant information about what our strategy might be, that kind of thing. I mean, it's not like it's a big secret, but
Right.
I just would rather not talk about possible lawsuits in public. But you guys can certainly take motions to do whatever you want in public later. I just would rather not give away a strategy in a public conversation.
All right. Rob?
Strategy aside, I think we owe it to the public because this has been such a big issue. I think we owe it to the public to have this be a public conversation besides, until we get to a point where it becomes very, very sensitive information.
Well, you can just skip over it if you can't answer it, right?
Sure.
Karen?
I would feel more comfortable going into a non-meeting, and then when we come back into public session, we can always give a small update in public. Sorry, Rob.
So we're going to take a vote on whether to go into a non-meeting at this time. There's no way to estimate how long that's going to take, but my hope would be that we would try to stick to 20 minutes or less. So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Extensions? Sorry.
See.
You're up.
Motion passes. So, to the public and to the camera crew, we'll ask you to step out for a bit, and we'll call you back in when we're done.
Yep. Great, coming back together then. In non-public, the board has had a discussion.
Hold on one second. Camera's all set?
If you give me one more second, let me
Okay.
Oh, the pressure.
Take your time.
Take your time.
You put the camera off.
Who we miss?
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Just coming back from our non-meeting, the board has had a discussion as in accordance with our agenda regarding the Conval press release that they've initiated a lawsuit. And at this time, I would hear the motion.
So the motion is to authorize our superintendent to engage legal counsel and join Conval as a plaintiff in their lawsuit against the state of New Hampshire.
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, guys. And we have the matter of early retirement.
We do. So I circulated a packet for you. And in I think 2 of the 4 years I've been here, we have offered early retirement offers to I think we've done MDEA and MESA, maybe MDA twice, MESA once. And basically, what we've done is when we forecast that we will have fund balance at the end of any given year, we look to extend an offer to essentially waive the 18-month notice requirement for folks if they have an interest in retiring at the end of the current school year as opposed to 18 months later. And so in those instances, folks could take advantage of an early retirement. They'd get the buyout that they would normally earn under their collective bargaining agreements at the end of the current school year, rather than needing to put in 18 months notice to retire in 18 months. And in years past, not since I've been here, but in years past, prior to my being here, the board has on occasion also offered additional stipend incentives in case, again, folks are thinking about maybe taking advantage of the offer, and sometimes the additional stipend is an attractive option. And so we met with Janelle a number of times, the administrative team. We've been talking about this probably since January, just trying to really make sure, what funds we felt we had available. And we felt that we had approximately $250,000 that we could set aside, that we would anticipate in fund balance that we could utilize for this purpose if the board were so inclined. And so in the packet you have, the first 2 pages is the draft of an offer for the MDEA unit. Page 3 is a draft of the offer for MESA, and page 4 is a draft of the offer for the specialist. And so the criteria that we used, let me get my notes real quick because they're not in your packet. We looked at the number of folks that would be eligible given certain criteria, ran, potential scenarios, how much, if we allocated this much to this unit, how many people might that entail? And so with MDEA, we already had a couple of folks who had indicated that had put in for retirement at the end of this school year. And so we sort of grandfathered those folks into this offer. If the board extends this offer, those folks would receive the additional stipend that might be proposed, because it doesn't seem fair to penalize them because they did put in 18 months in advance and then this offer were to come out. So we've already budgeted for their normal payouts, and so this would be, those folks would receive the additional stipend, so those 2 folks this year. The other piece to this is we have 3 folks in MDEA who have already submitted intent to retire at the end of next year. And so typically these offers are seniority based, with the most senior employees who request the buyout receiving preference. So the way we structured the MDEA draft is to offer the 3 folks who have already indicated a desire to retire next year, basically grandfathered them to the top of the list. So if those 3 folks chose to take advantage of this offer, they would receive priority. And then the remaining funds that would be left for the MDEA unit would be based on seniority for those that put in. So we have 3 folks, like I said, for next year that are looking to have put in for retirement for next year. If those 3 were to take advantage of this offer, with the amount of that pool of money that we've set aside for MDEA, the next 2 most senior employees in the entire unit would be able to take advantage of the offer. If it doesn't happen to be employees who are more senior, if it's further down the list, then there may be up to another 3 employees in MDEA that might be eligible. But the parameters were that folks had to have, and this was across all units, a minimum of 20 years of service with a higher date of honor before January 1, 2000. And so for MDEA, that was 37 people. So we have a lot of senior employees in MDEA. 2 are retiring this year and 3 have put in for next year. So that would leave 32 folks that would be eligible, but we only have a finite amount of money. So that's the way that offer was structured. We did a similar structure for MESA, same parameters, same years of service, different amount of money in that pool. And that comes out to 24 eligible folks, and there is 1 person that's in queue to retire at the end of this year. So they would receive, just like an MDEA, because they already put in, they would get the stipend. And the board has already waived, that person put in to retire this year, and the board waived the 18-month payout for that person. So they're already getting the payout. And then with specialists, with the same time frame, there are only 2 eligible employees. So we accounted for both of them, whether or not they would choose to take advantage of it. So going back to the very beginning, we anticipate, we're confident, not anticipate, that we could allocate $250,000. We broke it out, as you can see on the letters, to each unit. And at most, we would spend down $246,000 of that $250,000. We couldn't get quite to $250,000 based on the amount of payouts. But we ran best case for folks if they have the most number of days accumulated that they would get paid out for, that type of thing. So I know it's a lot of information. I did talk with the leadership of all 3 associations, so they're aware that this is something I was bringing to you for your consideration. It's your decision. But again, sometimes you have folks that 18 months is a long time to think about, impending retirement. And there may be folks who are, would be interested in pursuing other things. This isn't an attempt to get anybody to leave. But as you know, from a fiscal standpoint, when you have more senior employees leave, when you hire and you backfill, you tend to hire folks that are not as deep into the scale with less seniority. So there's a cost savings when you hire.
Brian?
We're confident we could fill 32 teacher positions?
That won't be, not that many would leave. The max that would be able to go would probably be 5 to 6.
That would able to go? I thought you just said that 30
there's 32 that meet the criteria, but because of the cap on the amount of money, we could only afford for.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yep.
And we've got 5 already.
Right.
What's the health insurance implication for someone who is going to, was set to retire? Now they're going to retire in a couple of months. If they took this, they're out, right? From a health insurance standpoint?
I would defer to the business office for that, but part of what I
don't know the contract well enough to know what it calls for.
It would really depend on each individual circumstance, on age and such.
Yep.
So I'm not certain what it would mean for each person.
Would we be able to replace the 2 specialists?
One of them, I believe, has already put in an intent to retire for next year. And so, they're difficult to fill, but the reality is that they are 2 senior employees, and we're going to likely be replacing them in the near future, unfortunately. If they were to retire this year, we would, part of the reason, we're looking at this now is that it's March. This is actually a little late to extend the offers. We've typically done it in January. And so, the quick turnaround is so that the first meeting in April is the meeting that we do staff nominations. And so our intent would be to be able to bring forward the names of those folks who might accept the offer for that April meeting. And then we'd be able to put those positions right into our hiring process for next year. So we're coming up on the timeline for hiring for next year, but I think we'd be okay.
Neil?
We're bypassing finance with $250,000. We've got to start using finance department. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's a rec open for every one of these positions. Early retirement is if you want to keep younger people in. We don't have them. We've got a rec in for nurse, we've got a rec in for teachers. You just complained about the fact that you couldn't hire paras. This is crazy. And by the way, I'm one of those early retirement people.
Any other discussion?
I don't know what that means.
You get a bonus to quit.
You did that. All right. Is there a motion? Do you want to take the 3 units
Table.
separately?
Motion to table.
You have a motion to table.
Is there a second?
No second. All right, do we want to take the 3 units separately or all at once? I need a motion.
I'll go all at once.
Okay. Brian's made a motion to accept all 3.
Second.
Second.
The second was Scott. Any other discussion?
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Kristen?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Karen?
Pass.
Neil?
No.
Nick?
Abstain.
Brian?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Betty?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Karen?
Abstain.
Be 9.834 yes, 1.075 no, 0.97 abstain.
All right.
Passes.
And there will be a need for non-public. The personnel report is also in your packet, but it hopefully won't be extensive.
Thank you for your time, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, we have a couple of policies for first read. They were included in your packet.
So, for Colleen's benefit, our policy calls for 2 reads of any policy change. So the first read means we've delivered it in the packet. In days of old, it would actually be paper in a binder, and we would actually read them for the first time. We don't go through that now. So in your packet, there's one of each policy, and then there's also a Word document that says what the motions are and what the committee went through to get there. And then at our next meeting on April 2nd is when we will actually vote these policy changes in, and it's the opportunity for the board to debate and wordsmith any particulars. So,
All right. We're going to discuss budget committee participation and attendance
I have a
by
question.
administrators.
I have a question.
Neil?
On school volunteers, is that going to go backwards? I couldn't, by the wording, I couldn't tell whether I'm going to get checked again or not in that policy.
no, there's nothing in the updated policy that speaks to like a retroactive event.
Okay.
For existing volunteers.
You're gonna wanna have your super
All right. Budget committee participation and attendance. I do not recall who had requested this on the list.
I put it on there. The budget committee had asked. I had 2 people from the budget committee, or 3 people from the budget committee text me and asked me that I have that put on the agenda. And it was just wanting to know what the participation was going to be by the administration and budget committee meetings.
Okay. Lisa, if you were to follow the board's existing guidance, what would your participation be?
We will provide any reports or information that are required. It's actually a statutory obligation for them to complete their work. And I would be in attendance at meetings that were relative to budget development, so typically later in the fall and then into the winter. But for other meetings that are really outside of the budget development cycle, we would provide necessary reports.
Reports that are in existence, or would you create reports?
Generally, they're in existence. If there's anything that would be an extraordinary burden that doesn't currently exist, but the information exists in another format, we would present it in whatever format we currently have, and present same to the school board. If it's something that you don't normally see, make sure that the school board has that as well.
Any other discussion? Rob?
How many meetings does the budget committee have?
They've been meeting
Once a month.
April, May, June, August, September, October.
So 10, 12-ish?
Yeah, 10. It hasn't been 12. I know they haven't met.
And how many did you guys go to last year?
This past year, they didn't meet in August, but the year before they did. I was at all but one this past year, April to April, because the one I was not at was over April vacation and there was no administration present. I did alert the chair when that meeting went out for, he announced he sent the draft agenda. I did indicate it was over vacation and that no administration would be available, but they didn't move it. So that was the only meeting that didn't have administration presence. And let me correct what I just said. There was administration at all meetings. I missed when I was out this fall as well.
But Janelle's was
Yes,
in, or
and Jeremy
Jeremy
attended quite a few as well. So we've had administration presence at every meeting except last April.
And the purpose of you being at those meetings is not legal, it's just, it's not mandated, but it's
Correct.
rather to provide background information and discussion.
Provide information.
In their discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wayne is left, so I'll do it for him. That summary page that I keep asking for, that he wanted to get also, wouldn't take the secretaries 20 minutes to fill out. And I strongly recommend that we supply that to the budget committee. They've asked for it, Dave's asked for it. 20 minutes for each secretary, she could have it done at every school.
All right. Any other discussion? Thank you very much. Open positions and length of posting?
Sure. I think, Brian, you had requested this at the last meeting. So included in the packet was a listing of open positions and the date that they were originally posted. Of course, now I can't find it. There it is. And you'll see a lot of it. We keep postings up for substitutes year-round because we're always looking to add more substitutes. And sometimes periodically we'll refresh those. But other than that, I wasn't sure, there was information that was requested. I don't have much to add to it at this point. We still have open positions, as you can see.
Just,
All right.
I agree that when you put them in there, Lisa, that's how you do it, you just leave them there. But it would be nice if you had a rec number in there so you could see if they were getting filled at all. The para is always there, the teachers are always there, the nurse is always there. You can't tell from School Street if it's a new rec or an old rec.
The substitute nurse, we always need, those ads, all of the substitutes, they're to add to our substitute pool. So we keep those ads up all the time because we want people, they can't be added to our pool until they fill out an application, because we need them to sign off on all of the, the legalese. They just can't call us up and be put onto the sub list. So anything that says substitute, those don't fill. We add to our sub list as the year goes on. We're constantly adding teacher subs. Jeremy reviews all of the applicants for teacher subs and does background checks on those.
Well, I hope people aren't skipping them because they think they're old. That's all I can say.
No, I understand. And sometimes we do refresh if we see the need.
Put rec numbers in there or quantities or something to show that they're new, might help.
All right. Anyone else?
The reading specialist there.
Mm-hmm.
How many applications do we have?
Oh, gosh. I don't know how many we had, how many certified? None.
How about?
No certified.
Qualified.
I think we had a couple of applicants who had statements of eligibility. And I know that we had offered the position to a candidate who had a statement of eligibility, who took a position in another district, totally different position. It wasn't a reading specialist position.
Get any feedback on why they turned it down?
The position in the other district was something more to their liking. It wasn't a reading specialist position. It was in the same genre, but it was a position that person felt better suited their skill set and needs. And I think it might have been closer to home for them too, I'm not sure. So.
Looking at the list, are there some of these roles where we just sort of muddle through without, and other roles where we're contracting services because we have to fill the need?
We have contracted in the past. It happens a lot with specialists, so psychologists, speech language, OT, PT. Well, we contract all of our PT. We don't have any in-house. And I'm just scrolling through some of the long-term subs. We've used a sub from our sub pool in some cases, but haven't taken down the long-term sub posting because we're still looking for someone to fill out perhaps the rest of the year. We have to be really careful about how we use subs from our sub pool in long-term positions. After 20 days, we can't keep someone who doesn't actually hold a credential in a position. So we have to be very careful about pulling from our sub pool to fill long-term positions, but we do that. We have to do that sometimes. So I don't know if I totally answered your question, but.
Well, and I'm not asking for a particular,
Yep.
but what I wonder is if we're going for a lengthy period of time, still trying to fill, and we're paying for a contract service.
Yep.
A contract service has a different type of price structure because you're not paying benefits and that kind of thing, but you're going to be paying a premium.
Yep.
So is there a point when we give up and just go with contract service?
We can't. We have to continue to try to advertise and fill because of our obligations to our collective bargaining units. So, for example, I'll use the specialist again because this is where it typically happens. If we are having difficulty filling a position, we'll notify the association either when I meet with them, which is monthly, or Catherine will reach out because she typically oversees all the specialists and she'll say, we're not having any luck finding a candidate. We're going to have to go to a contracted service. And so the expectation is that that's not a permanent solution, that we will continue to keep the positions posted and continue to try to fill them. So some of these, at this point, if you look at the school psychologist, that one just went up not too long ago. We had I believe was it this year we had a contracted psychologist? Yes. And so we posted that in anticipation, trying to fill this year. We're finishing the year with the contracted service, but trying to get a jump start on hiring for next year. That's an existing position that currently is filled with a contracted person. And we have actually this year, for the first time since I've been here, we hired a contracted person to do case management and special education because we had a difficult time finding qualified, certified special education folks.
Would this be difficult to continue to bring forward to us?
No.
I'm curious to look back at this, maybe not the next meeting, but on a regular basis, and look at the movement within this.
Sure.
Right? Are the same positions still on there, and are we still struggling, or are we seeing positions come and go?
Yep. We can do that. Wasn't hard to run. We weren't sure how to run it at first. We thought it might be more difficult than it was.
So I'm noticing that it does say district-wide speech language pathologist, and it also Monadnock Regional, which should be multiple, maybe. I'm confused about how we're classifying where the positions are.
I can't answer that without digging deeper.
Okay. Anyone else?
Something else that nobody else does.
Right.
So a couple of meetings ago, Scott had asked Jeremy what the plan was for accelerated students. So I see this reading specialist here. It's in my mind, and I'm not an educator, but the reading specialist could be one of the catalysts for some of those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So, if our current approach, and this goes back to kind of my conversation about filling sub-positions that we, can't fill. So if we continue to do the same thing and we're not getting any results, what are we doing differently,
Mm-hmm.
To continue to attract, qualified people to at least be interested?
Right. I mean, part of it is our demographic. I mean, we have Keene State nearby, but the reality is we're in a part of the state that it's very difficult to hire. certain positions, and certain positions are statewide difficulties. I think we've talked about the critical shortage list before, and special education is one of them. Reading specialist is on the list. At the next board meeting, when we get to setting the agenda, one of the things that, for the education report, we'd like to talk about is staffing and kind of what we're thinking moving forward into next year. So that will answer, I think, some of your questions. Maybe not the how are we attracting and recruiting, but some of those other pieces.
I think the recruiting piece is maybe a conversation that we should keep up. Like for me at work, if I need drivers, the answer that what's never acceptable for me to give is, well, I just can't find drivers, right? I have work that needs to be done. So my job is to go figure that out, right? So if we just continue to do the same, that I think, repeatedly, if we continue to do the same thing and we're not liking the results, then we got to change our approach. And
Right.
I'm not saying I have the answer, but I am open to having that conversation of how do we become more creative into attracting people to want to come work for this district.
That's fair.
Anyone else? Thank you for this.
You're welcome.
Classroom supplies?
Yep. I'm going to take, this one's kind of back to basics. I've had this agenda item we've discussed it previously. In at least one school, we're still having issues with basic supplies in classrooms. And I don't know where the communication breakdown occurs, but from my understanding, funds exist for these basic resources in the classroom, but teachers are still going to parents for them. And I'm not discussing school parties, that sort of thing. I'm talking about basic things like tissue, toilet paper, So I think there needs to be some investigation on administration's part and seeing where that communication breakdown's occurring so that we can get the basic resources that kids need right now.
Can you help the board understand the format in which these requests are going out?
Yeah, by text to parents. So I think there are some things that obviously that parents bring in that are common sense that they try to send their kids to school with, and I think there are special things that, if they have a Christmas party or Thanksgiving party and the kids want to bring something in to contribute, that makes sense.
You're not talking about a list of supplies that would be nice to have for the classroom as a
No.
favor to the parents?
I'm talking about basic things like tissues so kids can wipe their nose. If we're parents are sending kids to school with all these really basic supplies, I think that's a problem when those funds exist to purchase those supplies. It's something that needs to be resolved. I don't think it's the responsibility of the parents to resolve those issues with administration or to direct people in teaching positions or other positions within the district to resolve those issues with administration. I think that's part of administration's responsibilities, and something needs to be looked at.
Do you know if parents have gone to their classroom teachers and then the principal after that, if they don't feel that the teacher has addressed the issue? That's happened and nothing's been, okay.
I think we had this conversation like a couple of months ago, right, about the
Right.
process, and we're working on making it easier.
Do you want to share with the board that the parent did go to the principal and the principal contacted you and attempted to resolve this?
Well, I wasn't going to make it specific examples. We can use, I'm not the only person, but
The question was asked.
I don't think it's appropriate to use me as a specific example and start using people's names in a public format like this. I think it's
I wasn't aware that you are the specific example. I'm just aware that there was a situation and that Missy did reach out to you because you're the one who expressed the concern.
If we want to have that discussion in a public session, I can tell you that I personally was told that I should begin directing teachers to go speak to their principal and to administration in order to resolve the issue. I think that's what I'd like to complete my answer to that question. I don't think that it's in the wheelhouse of parents to, especially in my case, where I'm a board member, to begin telling teachers how they're supposed to be going to their school principal or to administration to resolve issues or to supply basic supplies to the classroom.
What's the context of the letter? Is it a wish list that they send out?
No. This is where I want to be careful.
Okay.
Because it's my.
Because in my
we're
experience,
using-
there were parents that wanted to donate stuff, and each year we'd send out a wish list. And Kleenex was always on the wish list, I know that, along with other things.
Yeah, wiki sticks, things.
But it was very, very optional, and it was just for people that wanted to donate stuff.
I know right away when we learned of this, we did reach out to the principal, and she was not aware that this had happened. And so we are trying to work on that communication to make sure that that doesn't happen.
The supplies in question, were they available?
Yes.
So this is a one-off.
And I want to be very clear that I'm not at all opposed to the idea of sending wish lists home for things for the classroom. I'm talking about basic staples, tissue products, that sort of thing. This isn't something that kids should be rucking in. I send my daughter to school with the packs of tissues in her pockets and stuff, but shouldn't have to strap on a 4-pack of tissue boxes onto the front of her like she's, going into a field deployment.
So I think I heard Janelle say that the supplies that were needed were available,
Mhm.
and it was just the process by which they were requested.
Yeah.
So we need to work on that. Are there any further concerns?
Nope, I'm happy that we're working on resolving this, and if it comes up again, we can discuss it again.
We received a letter from the Fitzwilliam Selectmen. It was included in the previous board packet. It's included here again in this board packet. And this agenda item was requested by Kristen.
And actually, when I read the minutes, it looked like Neil also requested it, but I didn't know this was coming, and I was taken by surprise when it was included last meeting's packet, so we didn't really discuss it too much then, and I was hoping that the board would want to send a response in some way to the selectmen. I wasn't sure the procedure to do that, but felt like it warrants a response.
Well, I added it to the list because if a select board calls you, you owe them an answer. They're hammering you in this letter. Hammering you too, Janelle. I don't know what the story is on that because I don't know what the dates are, but
And I also know that there was, I remember the letter that we, I think Rob crafted the letter after the, what is it, the M25 or whatever it's called, it was late. MS-25. We did respond at that time, and that was brought up again in this letter, which I feel like that was, we already responded to
if that's the
that.
answer, tell them you answered it.
But it's the other portions of the letter too. I'm not sure if,
Yeah, this is not the exact letter that I was talking about. The other one was even worse.
this is the one that was in the last meeting's packet as well.
There's a lot of talk, a lot of things going on behind the scenes on private pages and blocked profiles that I don't know about. I can't respond to all of that. I don't know where these concerns came from. I can't defend myself because I don't know if it's from minutes or from watching the YouTube video of the meeting or
If you don't
word
feel it's
of
worth
mouth.
answering, don't.
But their accusations are inaccurate. And if I were to respond, I would say something along those lines, and I don't think that that's really the kind of thing that, I'm not interested in responding.
I mean, I guess if I recall, and I'm not going to go back and open the letter again, but some of their concern was not setting the rate in a timely manner or getting information to the town towns, and we just spend a fair amount of time catching up on several past due audits, and it was recommended that we hold until we had accurate data to offer.
And we responded.
I'm not
We did
disagreeing with you. All I'm
respond to
saying
that.
is that's the answer we should give them.
We did.
Did you say, answer this letter?
We answered the first letter that talked
Previous
about what
letter.
he just talked about, the tax rate.
I wrote it.
Yes, I remember Rob wrote
I wrote it.
it. It was a good letter.
Thanks.
Not good,
But it's,
not good enough
yeah.
to stop this letter.
You know, the other two paragraphs, I also agree that there's some inaccuracies in that, and I don't know.
I don't have any problem with
I
that.
don't like the way it's personal.
Yeah, and I agree that there are inaccuracies, and that's what I'm wondering if we want. But if you don't feel comfortable, then.
I feel it's the duty of the chairman to represent the district as a whole, not just the interest of their own town. I feel it's the duty of the chairman to help put together an agenda that moves things forward, to run orderly meetings, to listen to the will of the board, not the whole district, but to the board members. And, you know, I have certain signatory responsibilities, but that's my job as chair of this board, is to keep our meetings running. And I feel that I did that.
Okay, it's been on there, you answered it, well, you're gonna answer it.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, oh, Winston.
Winston?
You know, the first name on here is, she is no longer a selectman.
That's true.
She did not run again.
You fired her, huh?
No,
Nope,
she didn't want to run.
again.
I'm only
So we have a
kidding.
new selectman. And then Kristen and I both had gone into the selectman's office and explained about the tax rate. And they make it sound like it's the first time it's ever happened. And almost every year we've been in existence, we haven't been on time with the September audit. And we did a pretty good job this year with Janelle doing a lot of work. And she could have just sort of ignored it and something laid around, then be repercussions afterwards, but she didn't. She held to her goal of doing it right, and it came out right. We don't have to send out additional tax bills or anything. So I think that that's a lesson that they've got to understand. And they just don't want to understand it the way I look at it.
And the part where they said, they're talking about how we threatened our own budget committee to the court and all of that, they're missing a lot of information there as well. So that's the only thing I was thinking.
Not to wade into Fitzwilliam politics, but
The heck is going on down there?
let's wade into Fitzwilliam
no idea.
politics. Because they're politics for our district. And if we have select boards that are not up to speed with certain information, or they don't understand information in the proper way, these are generally the people that are going to spur movements for towns to look elsewhere and to leave the district. So I don't think it's productive to simply ignore them. I'm glad the last letter that they sent, that we addressed that letter. And I think we should make it very clear that if there's any select board members from any of our towns that have a grievance or some sort of concerns or questions, that the board is available to speak with them. Is that fair?
Winston and then Neil?
Yeah, you know, is there any town behind in payments? I think we've been pretty lucky. With
Everybody's
this.
been doing really well with that. I can't tell you specifically if there's anybody that's, that hasn't paid, say, their March. But I believe everybody's paid up through February. Yeah,
'Cause that's a-
everybody's pretty current.
Big improvement for our district, because often there were many towns that didn't pay the bill on time because they had no money and the tax rate hadn't been set late. And if this September date audit is late, it affects every single town until it's fixed. And that's what upsets people, because the town needs money, or another town needs money, and it makes them quite irritated that they can't get the money to pay their bills too. And I think that they never talk to us as two members of the representative of the town. And as far as I know, there was no comment about anyone leaving the district in Fitzwilliam the night of the town meeting.
There was.
They tried to pass a motion to start a feasibility study and they turned it down. And so I don't think there's any real big political deal there, except the new member of the board may be somebody that will listen closer, I don't know.
Well, I just wanted to mention one other thing about those funding of legal fees. That's an oxymoron. Anything that the school district spends, whether it's the budget committee or the school board, is going to get changed to the taxpayer. And it was crazy. I think they're referring to this letter here that I'm going to have added to the agenda, but that's crazy. Somebody could have at least gone and told them, well, it doesn't matter where you're going to pay it anyway. That was crazy. But to even say that.
I guess I had one question related to that. Is it true that we've funded legal fees for the budget committee in the past?
I don't
my
know.
understanding.
Yeah, that's what I've
Yes, you
heard,
have.
but I don't have
They've paid the
the,
budget committee's attorneys in the past, i.e. when I sued them.
Sue Derek?
Mr. Little was right there, right behind me.
Can we verify that?
Yes, I think there's
Not-
I think there's a picture in the, on
Not the
Facebook.
lawsuit, the fact that we actually paid.
right.
For the budget committee.
We can see what we can dig up.
It's not a pressing issue,
Yeah.
but for future.
And, I think it depends on the circumstances, too. Different circumstances. Not all
The
lawsuits
point
are
is,
created equal.
it's still gonna get charged to the towns.
Yeah.
No matter whether it's a separate bill or the regular tax bill. Who's gonna pay it? The towns.
Winston, and then I hope we can wrap up.
I've been told by the selectmen, and we've been in, that they've called over here and left messages, and no one ever called them back from the office.
Well,
And I checked with the office, and they said there's no record of anybody calling for any information about a problem. So I think we've got a standoff here, and I'm right and I'm wrong, and I'm leaving out a few facts, like I read in some other letters during this whole process of coming around, so.
that's not the first time that's come up either.
All right. We have minutes for March 5th. Only public minutes, we cannot have a non-public on that either.
Move the minutes as written. So moved.
So I'll take the motion from Scott, the second from Brian. Any discussion?
Someone have something?
Neil had.
What? Go ahead, blame me.
You want, in the quote in the beginning, it says, engage and educate Avery student instead of every student. That was what you emailed before. So that Karen didn't have to.
Hey. I also, in the next email, told her I was the worst speller past 6th grade.
All right. Anything else?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And I hope that we've all been signing the forms coming around for the school safety funding, the grant.
I think
I might be the only one that didn't get that, so I'll make sure to sign it before I go.
If you didn't, I'll put them right by Laura. You could just make sure. We have to, it's
we
required
sign.
that all board members sign.
Someone's gonna have to catch up with Karen.
Yeah, we'll give her a call.
Looks like we have.
I signed it. You signed it.
Without signing.
I signed it.
My name is spelled right, too.
Kansas?
Yep. I'd like to move the manifest in the amount of $1,140,174.31.
Is there a second?
Second.
The second can be Kristen. Wants to know if we have the money.
Yes, we do.
Yes, Michael.
Oh, memories.
All right. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
For next meeting's agenda, you'll see that there are many requests noted in the minutes from March 5th that we couldn't take up this evening because we had a really full agenda. So I've already started here with a list of board goal setting, fill rate for para-sub, pre and post rate change, survey of current substitute list participants, update from the superintendent evaluation committee, negotiations, armed security officer legal opinion, ed report on staffing, is that right, Lisa?
Yes, the education report. Boy, that's loud.
Board goals, I said that. And we have a school board ethics policy. There is an addendum to that that does request a signature from each school board member, so we'll get that around at the next meeting. Anything else for the next meeting? Neil?
Yes, I'd like to add to who authorized the attorney letter to the Budget Committee on 1/24/19. The attorney sent a letter to the Budget Committee. I'd like to see who authorized that.
The board did.
We did.
The board
Voted on it.
You vote on that?
It did.
Please, could I see that vote?
And it was a meeting that was held on short order too.
That
Was it
was the
the
5:31
Yeah.
where my kids sat, yeah.
Neil, are you requesting for that letter to be on the agenda?
Well, if we authorize it, I'll rub in my hair and say we authorized it, but I thought it had gone out without authorization.
No.
No.
Definitely authorized it.
I'd be surprised
Pretty
if
big
it
discussion,
Anything else
actually.
for next meeting?
We get an update on the construction.
Yes.
About the data collection.
Data collection?
Yes.
Particular data?
Cyber data? Asked him about it last time.
I know. I have to be able to call it that. The action plan that we put out before.
The key-
Like the beginning of February. Assessment?
The comprehensive needs assessment. I forget if we were going to do that the first meeting in April or the second, because Jeremy's got to.
Here, comprehensive needs assessment.
Okay.
I had to turn it over, I'm not
All right.
used to going on.
Yeah, it's
every
on
other
there.
time.
Gotcha.
And school safety task force training chapter. Lisa, do you want to do?
Second meeting of April, please.
Okay.
I don't know if this is an ad or not.
And could you do training and exercises in the same meeting so we can just wrap it up? Because exercises is pretty short.
Like Pilates?
Then definitely the second meeting in April.
Yeah, second. Neil?
I'm going to say it, and then if you say it goes under A, I'll withdraw it. I think we have to follow our rules on dates due. That thing that Scott put together that showed when we were supposed to do things, which we didn't do last year. And I'd like to really push to have the Saturday meeting in October, not December. I think that added to our problems all over the place, this late budget.
Okay, so we want to discuss the reoccurring motion.
Well, I was actually looking at that to see what's due up at this time of year. So we'll actually have the committee appointments on the agenda next time. We'd be within 2 meetings of certified staff renewal, which is due by the 15th.
Next meeting, you're doing it the first meeting in April.
Okay.
Because the second meeting is after the 15th.
Okay. We usually move on teacher appreciation lunch in April. But to Neil's point, on our list of meetings, like the agenda for the year, did we have the joint meeting with the budget committee on that list?
I was just looking.
Oh, I forgot to look.
Not on the list we got.
No, but that's the one that slept and what then, started the avalanche of not getting things done on time. That was part of it.
Yeah, we included only our regular school board meetings, that would be the 7 PM Tuesdays. We can add in a joint meeting with budget. Lisa, do you think we can come up with budget?
I'd like to have the conversation about the timing of it at the next meeting, if I could request that.
Anything else? Okay, I think I've got it all. Is there a second public comment? Bob?
He's gonna get a chance to talk no matter what.
Let's be happy I'm not singing. I just wanted to take a moment because we didn't talk about it tonight because there's so much going on. I had the opportunity, Eric had called me or texted me and told me I should go see Newsies.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the theater production that the kids did was it last weekend or 2 weekends ago? I got to tell you, I'm not a film person. I'm not a theater person, despite my obvious abilities. But I left there like emotional, watching our kids. They were incredible. Even if they weren't good, which they were unbelievable, it was absolutely breathtaking to see the courage that they showed in their performance. I mean, I think at one point there was 52 different kids on the stage. And there was also there was members of our staff on the floor with or in the production with them. I think there was even a Swansea police officer, not in uniform, of course, in the production. But I got to tell you, it's something I had never done before, and now I'll never miss. To watch, and I don't even, like I said, I'm not a theater person, but I would encourage all of us to really find something else that's outside of our wheelhouse to see and experience and watch our kids do. Because I left there like I said, it was emotional. I was extremely proud, and I didn't know a person on the stage. So hats off to them. I hope we do something to recognize that production and that crew. For and I don't know where extracurricular lies on it, but it was simply marvelous. They practiced, I think it was every day since probably Christmas vacation. So I just want to say congratulations to that group and to the people who put it together.
Shows at the elementary schools, and those kiddos were also absolutely amazing. I just love seeing all of their talents, and Chris Klein worked really, really hard leading that for us. Lots of other staff were involved too. We have a lot of people putting in a ton of time for us outside of their normal duties, and it's very much appreciated. Yep. All right.
Lisa,
Winston.
I can put this under public comments. I don't want to get up there and make a speech. But prior to the show on Saturday night, there was a spaghetti supper. It was excellent. They gave tours of that, 68-hour program that you've been on? They took us down to the supply room and they cataloged every single thing that's done. It's a massive operation that they're doing for each school in each district. And I think they ought to be commended for this work because this is our first year.
Yes. Yes.
And it's coming out, and they got some problems, and they're already working on them. And I'd just like to praise the people that are working and volunteer for that program. It doesn't happen in any other school, other than Monadnock district schools.
I like it. Any other praise? What else we got?
Celebrate.
Patty?
Possibly a quick request that we send a thank you note to the second graders that sent us snack tonight. Because they're lying about the school board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll hand deliver it to them.
Thank you.
Encourage the third graders. Friends.
All
Said
right.
encourage the third graders for now.
Anything else under public comment? We can take a motion to adjourn.
No.
Now we have no public.
Motion enter non-public.
B and then C.
Okay.
Like, put that away.
We'll give the cameras a moment to put them down. But thanks for hanging out, guys.